Morning, everybody. I am CEO of the Richmond O'Brien County Chamber of Commerce, and we are so glad to have you join us for our fourth call of our Grits and Government Legislative Virtual Series. As y'all know, we normally have a wonderful breakfast at the City Center to bring you this information with our legislative priorities for our representatives and also our community partners. But with COVID, we are bringing it to you virtually this year. I am very excited for our special guest today. It is Mr. Chris Clark, the CEO of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. He is such a great presenter, so I feel like this is such an honor for y'all to get to hear this today. The Georgia Chamber has been such a huge resource for us as a small chamber throughout this COVID pandemic, and we just want to thank the Georgia Chamber for all the information that they pass down to us. It has been absolutely invaluable to all of us and the information that we share with our members. So first of all, thank you. I do want to let you know that there is not going to be a call this Thursday, and there will not be a call next week for Thanksgiving, but we will start our calls back up on December 1st. So at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Chris Clark officially. Prior to joining the Georgia Chamber, Chris served as Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and as Deputy Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Before his state service, he was the president of the Fayette County Development Authority and CEO of the Hawkinsville Pulaski County Chamber of Commerce. Chris serves on the board of directors for Council of State Chambers and sits on the board of the Georgia Allies and Georgia Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. He is also a member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Council of 100 and the Political Affairs Committee. Chris and his wife Tiffany, their son Christian, and their dog Daisy live in Peachtree City and attend Dogwood Church. At this time, Chris, I'll turn it over to you. And again, we are just so glad to have you in this 2021 strategic update for us. As I flip through the PowerPoint, a lot of y'all's goals match up with our legislative priorities that we have for our local representatives. So I'm so glad to see that those are also priorities from a state level for business in Georgia. So I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. I want to make sure that you can hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up? Is my volume's coming through better now?
You are loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. And can I ask, are you looking at me or are you looking at my PowerPoint? Yeah, I'm just curious.
We can see your PowerPoint.
Awesome. Great. Well, listen, thank you all for giving me a few minutes to share with you today. And we're going to show you some slides because this is a Chamber of Commerce event, right? You got to have some slides. And then we'll see if there's any questions at the end. And I'll just I can't see the chat. So, Catherine, if people have questions, let them put them in the chat and then you can just read them to me afterwards. But I want to give you a little perspective. As I said yesterday, do a presentation I said a little bit of bad news, but a whole lot of good news. And I'm going to try not to talk about politics for the next 30 minutes. OK, so I think everybody will be happy to not have a political discussion for a little bit this morning. But I do think it's important for business leaders at the local and state level to understand what's happening in the economy right now, as well as what the opportunities are and where it looks like we're going, because we really are going to need a full court press effort here in January, February, and March and April when the General Assembly reconvenes in order to make sure that this recovery that's underway in Georgia is maintained. And it's a recovery, quite frankly, that can spill over into our rural communities just as much as it's going to impact the Savannahs and the Atlantas of the world. So share with you a little bit of data, and I hope this is helpful today. Let me just start with what the COVID impact is and where we are today. As of literally about 2 weeks ago, we still had about 22% of Georgia businesses that haven't reopened. When you want to break those down, about 40% of our bars, 24% of our restaurants, 20% of arts, and just under 20% of our health and beauty companies haven't recovered. Now, our retail firms largely have reopened. We're at about 90% retail capacity. The bad news here is quite frankly, if you haven't reopened yet, it's highly unlikely that you will. The market's going to absorb what you didn't come back and take. And I think we're going to have a long-term recovery for particularly those restaurants and bars in Georgia. It's going to be tough. A lot of these guys relied on the CARES Act, and I want to thank Senator Perdue and Senator Loeffler who helped get those dollars in the pipeline. But the only way some of these small businesses, even the ones that have reopened, are going to hang on is if there's more support. Something we're working on every day. So we did a survey. It was interesting just about 6 weeks ago of rural influencers all over Georgia, and asked them, what are the issues that you're worried about as we come out of COVID? So you're dealing with some of those closed businesses. You're dealing with your own community, your own businesses. What's out there? What's worried you? What have you seen systemically that's popped up that you didn't maybe experience before? And I don't think we heard anything new, but overwhelmingly from those communities outside of Atlanta, it was a lack of broadband or a broadband system that wasn't strong enough to handle what their kids needed, what their business needed, what their community needed. We heard this issue about quality jobs. That's a little bit of a leftover from the last recession that rural Georgia is still struggling with. And we'll talk about jobs a little bit more in a minute. Trained workforce. You know, this is interesting in that it's a very different discussion about trained workforce than we were having literally 9 months ago. Right now, when we talk about trained workforce, we're talking about reskilling Georgians to make sure they've got skills to come back into the workforce, right? There's still 10 million Americans that aren't working today. And those men and women need vastly improved skills than they've had before. We heard a lot about downtown struggles, and I think, you know, particularly in a rural community, when you've got COVID coming in, you've got the impact of those bars and restaurants and small mom and pop retailers. Where are they primarily located? They're located in your downtowns. And so while we were seeing our downtowns really flourish for a while, they've taken it on the chin here over the last 6 months. Housing, you know, this is an issue, quite frankly, that we were talking about 2 years ago, the lack of affordable or middle income housing for rural communities, and the efforts of some communities to really get innovative and change their zoning laws. But the issue with housing, and I won't talk about it much more today, but I do think it's important to think about, particularly where you guys live. You know, you've got a great quality of life. Everybody wants to live in Richmond Hill and wants to live in your community, but can your teachers afford to live there? You know, can your police officers afford to live there? Can those young professionals that are just coming out of college, just coming out of technical school, or that maybe are starting their family, you know, they can't afford a 4,000 square foot house on the river. It's just not in, and you couldn't either when you were 23 years old. And so we really need communities to think longer term about what's your residential mix. I love the guys in Rome. They really struggled with this. And so the Rome City Council actually changed some of their zoning laws to allow a developer to come in and build this incredible multi-housing complex that has some affordable housing options, mainly middle income, and then retirement housing as well. So we're hearing those issues all over Georgia. And then obviously, when we did this survey, everybody was talking about politics, and I promised we wouldn't talk about that today. So some of these issues, what we're taking, how do we take these and then do something with them at the General Assembly, or give strategies back to Catherine and her peers to work with our local leaders on? Some of these issues that are really important for us. What's the state of rural health care? Obviously, our healthcare infrastructure has been really struggling right now. You can see, you can look at and read some of these statistics yourself, but I think an interesting kind of anecdote to this was I did a session a few weeks ago with some rural hospital administrators, and what they told me was they've been able to survive because of CARES Act. Their big worry is what happens in the second quarter of next year. And so I do worry that we're in for another round of hospital closures and impact to healthcare in Georgia that's probably going to hit us right as we're coming out of COVID, you know, the COVID third wave that we'll have this winter. Good news is Governor Kemp has been able to work with the administration in Washington to get Medicaid waivers, which we've been advocating and lobbying for 6 years now. And so that's going to bring a little more funding and support to Georgia, but we really do need to worry about long term, what happens to our rural communities, what happens to their health care. Because listen, if you don't have access to great hospitals in your community, we can't do anything to recruit industry there. You're blessed where you are because you've got your own systems, as well as St. Joe's and the other ones in Savannah. But this is going to be a bigger issue for us. The other issue here is obviously healthcare cost. Before COVID, we were tracking about a 3% rise in your healthcare cost annually through 2030. That adds up considerably. We're worried about those numbers actually being a little bit higher right now because of the lasting impact on COVID. It's one of the reasons that we started our own insurance plan. Many of you in Richmond Hill are actually part of the Georgia Chamber Smart Plan. We were able to give rebates to all of our small businesses that have our insurance plan back in June, try to give them some more savings. And we're working every day about how we can lower those healthcare costs. But it's something we need to be aware of as business leaders in our community. I'm going to skip over housing. I think we talked about that. I want to talk about a little bit about where the economy is going to go now. So some of that was some of the bad news. Let's talk about some of the good news, right? The good news is this week, or last week now, I get my days confused, but last week Governor Kemp announced that Georgia was named the best place to do business for the 8th year in a row. Y'all, to win that distinction in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a recession, is a testimony to what we've done in Georgia in the last decade. You remember the last recession. We were heavily weighted down on construction. It took us forever to come out of that in Atlanta. We still have rural communities still not out of the last recession. But we were able to diversify the economy so that we'll better weather this recession. In fact, the economists that I talk to say that Georgia will recover faster than any other state in the Southeast United States, maybe in the country. And if you look at the companies that Governor Kemp has recruited lately, it's technology, it's logistics, it's infrastructure, it's it's headquarters. No matter which sector the economy is going to dip, we're going to be okay. We're still going to have that base economy that's going to be able to weather this storm pretty well. Now, locally, and regionally, what does this look like for you? Well, we think there are 4 areas that we're going to see significant job growth in and investment opportunities for your businesses. One is in health and wellness. Obviously, we are all much more aware today of healthcare costs. We've just talked about some of those, but what I've been saying since the beginning of COVID is, I don't care what your business does, you are now in the health and wellness business from now on. If you can't prove that you can take care of your clients, your customers, your employees, you won't be in business. Just because COVID vaccine comes along doesn't mean something else is not following it, right? There is going to be an increased focus from individuals because they've had to focus on health and wellness, on families in a very different way. And so we're going to see incredible growth in biometrics and vaccine developments and pharmaceuticals as they're reshored. Communities that have that health and wellness base, that have companies that are in that space, they're going to do very well. And companies in that space are going to do great. The second area is in resiliency and sustainability. What does resiliency mean? It means that your company has invested and is prepared for whatever comes next. Granted, a next pandemic might not be for another 4 or 5 years, but a cyber attack is going to hit you next year, I guarantee you. We're seeing cyber growth at 180%. Incredible growth opportunities there. Your company, no matter how big, how small, has to invest and prepare so that you're ready. That means changing how you work, your flexibility, your technology systems. Can you take digital currency? All those things go into your resiliency. And then on top of that is this idea of sustainability. I think what has become clear to folks through the pandemic is that there is a connection between the environment and your business and what you do every day, right? So we are, no matter what you think about climate change, I'll leave that debate for you locally, but we do know that we have saltwater intrusion. From my days at DNR, we had saltwater intrusion in your community 15 years ago, right? We know we have some sea level rise. We see that on Tybee and the road heading out there every year. And so companies like Georgia Power and the EMCs and MEAG who are investing in solar, they're investing in Plant Vogtle, they're thinking about how to think differently long term. And so anyone that's involved in the engineering area and energy development, we're going to see a lot of investment in those fields. The third area is, for better or worse terms, we'll call it digital disruption, right? It means that instead of me being down there this morning and speaking to you and then being able to go out fishing this afternoon, instead I'm doing this from the Chamber studios in Atlanta. My son, just thank goodness went back to high school. He'd been digitally learning. We talked to a doctor recently who was doing 90% of his cases now is doing virtually. You have to have a digital presence, website, your app development. You have to be able to take digital currency, anything involving digital app development, web, broadband, you name it. That's where investment's going to land. That's going to be long-term growth for the state of Georgia. And then the fourth area is just this investment in innovation. So here's a little bit more bad news for you to put it in context. We were tracking that by 2030, America would lose about 40 million low-skilled jobs. All right. These are folks working at the counter at McDonald's, doing really low-skilled jobs in any type of business. We were going to lose those jobs because of AI, robotics, artificial intelligence. All of those things were going to take away those jobs. The pandemic has now expedited that. So instead of taking 10 years to lose 40 million jobs, it's probably going to be 5 years. 50% of the jobs that were available a year ago won't be available 3 years from now. Companies are investing during this time, and they're thinking differently. They're thinking, gosh, if I can't rely on my employees to be here because of safety, can I use technology to do this job instead? I'll give you a great example. There's a small business in South Georgia. I was talking to the CEO, and she said that prior to COVID, she did about 1% of her business online. She just didn't have the time to build out the websites and do all the other work that she needed to do. She had to close down during COVID. She had a little bit of savings. She put that into her digital platforms, and now she's getting about 80% of her business online, even though she's back open at full speed down in Thomasville. So here's the opportunity to innovate. If you're not thinking that way, you need to, because if not, quite frankly, you could be left behind. But these are the four areas that we think are going to have the best growth opportunities. Here are some, and I want to go a little bit deeper on a couple of these for you, right? So let's dig down. So where are the more specific opportunities here? Well, we talked about sustainability already. I want to talk a minute about manufacturing and supply chains. Now, you guys are right in the heart of Georgia's you're the heart of Georgia's logistics industry, right? With your distribution centers, with the port in Savannah, port down in Brunswick. What we're seeing around the world are businesses are thinking of, how do I bring back our manufacturing, our supply chains back domestically? How do I realign those? Maybe instead of being in China, I'm going to bring those back and put them in Mexico. Instead of being in India with my call center, I'm going to put it back in Vidalia, Georgia. I can't tell you the pipeline of businesses that we have looking at Georgia right now is unlike anything we've seen before. So those communities, particularly our rural communities that have the right infrastructure, that have the right leadership, that have the right industrial parks ready to go, you're going to see economic opportunity here as we come out of this recession, I think unlike anything we've seen in the last decade. There's a huge pent-up demand for bringing these things back home. Nobody knows what trade deals are going to look like in the future. And even if the new administration enters into an agreement with China that looks differently than what we've had for the last 4 years, there's still going to be a distrust there. And so does that mean you move to Taiwan? Does that mean you move to Indonesia? More and more, it means you're going to move somewhere back in the U.S. So we are very bullish on advanced manufacturing, logistics, and supply chain realignment. You're also seeing, because of that, you're going to see more focus on local grown and local made. One thing, as everybody was sitting home during COVID and they were online shopping, it was fine to get your toilet paper from Amazon if you could find it out there. But then you started looking at, wait, where does this product come from and where does this product? And you've seen this emergence of people wanting products made in Georgia. I talked to a company literally last weekend, and he was saying, Chris, I'm desperate to find someone in Georgia that will make textiles like we used to, T-shirts and shirts. He goes, all my clients now, they don't want to buy it from China anymore. They want to know that they're Georgians with their hands on it that are making it from Georgia cotton. You're seeing what Gary Black's doing with Georgia Grown. So this area, man, is it going to be strong. Do baby boomers care so much about local grown and made? Not so much. Millennials do, Gen Xers do. My small population of Gen Xers in the world. And Zoomers care about this as well. They want to know where something was made. They want to know the story behind it. Think about that when you think about your own opportunities. We've talked about digital dominance, the digital disruption. I feel we've covered that. I think there's going to be a diversification of rural Georgia in two ways. One, from a demographic way. Just look at the demographics. Rural Georgia, all of Georgia is getting browner and blacker, right? It's called the browning of Georgia. We're a much more diverse state than we were literally 2 years ago. We're going to be much more diverse in the next 5 to 10 years. Rural communities that welcome that diversity, I think, are going to do very well. And I'll give you an example. In the Midwest, there's a group of states that have actually called for a heartland visa, so that if you're a skilled worker in another country, they actually want you to come to the Midwest and put down roots in a rural community, because they've realized that might be the only way to save their rural towns. I also think there's a diversification of industry coming. It used to be that rural communities were heavy on ag. With the reshoring and supply chains, logistics, manufacturing are going to help. But also, and we're working on a bill now that would help facilitate this, you've got all these companies in an Atlanta or a Columbia or a Charlotte. And what they're going to happen is they're going to find it harder and harder to find workers. So they're going to be looking to hire remote workers in rural communities if you've got the infrastructure in place to help them do that. So you're going to have a diversification of rural America. And then there's these other two pieces. And I think these are so critical. If you want to have a vibrant economy, yes, it matters where you're located, but it matters more about the talent that is in those communities. Do you have a trained workforce and a pipeline of workers that can grow your economy? And there are two things here for you to think about. One, COVID, and quite frankly, it's kind of started before COVID a little bit. I call it the return of the millennials, right? All the millennials, when they graduated, they all ran off to a big city, right? And they're going to live there forever because they just wanted the city life. Well, that's changed now. Before COVID, the millennials were really getting into their childbearing years. They're really getting into kids going into school. And they realized it's expensive to live in an urban community. I don't get to spend time with my kids because I'm in traffic. And the schools might not be as vibrant as I want. And so they're starting to move back to rural, to suburban communities. We're seeing it all in my neighborhood in Peachtree City. So there is an opportunity. And then COVID's kind of expedited that, right? COVID's kind of kicked people to say, I want a little more space. I want a little different quality of life. And so I'm seeing communities all over Georgia figure out innovative ways to attract those millennials back home. There's one community out there that does, I love this, they do a homecoming every quarter in Atlanta. And the mayor comes up, and the county commissioner, the chamber, and they have a room and a bar up here. And they invite all the high school graduates from the last 10 years that live in Atlanta to come get an update on what's happening in their community. And then what they've seen is some of those guys start moving back because they learn there's opportunities to come back home. So focus on millennials. But the other one is this rise of the creation generation. And I love this so much. This is the Zoomers, right? So these are the kids that have just started to graduate college last year, all the way down to about 7th grade. This is Generation Z. They're a small generation, more like my generation of Generation X. But guys, they are the most creative and influential generation we'll ever have. They grew up, whether it's TikTok, creating their own music videos. They don't have to go get a record contract anymore. They just get on YouTube, and now they have 10 million followers and make $1 million. I talked to one of my members whose daughter is an influencer who, as soon as she hit 1 million followers, at 22 is making $1 million a year just from YouTube, not counting the endorsements that she gets. And she's creating something every day of value. So this Zoomer generation, they are all about creating new companies, creating new products, thinking differently. My son now, he's literally got a project they're working at our house this afternoon on a innovation competition entrepreneurial deal. And they've come up with this whole thing to help the physically challenged deal with social distancing. And so, it's this, their minds are always thinking differently. And so what I say to you is what I want you to think about. You need to start thinking today about how do you keep those kids in Richmond Hill? How do you keep them in Bryan County? How do you keep them from leaving? Well, you have maker spaces for them. You have competitions for them. Fitzgerald, Georgia, my hometown, just launched. It's a competition called Flex. And any high school student can enter this competition now to create their own business. And the winning high school companies actually get cash prizes and mentorships to start their own companies. That's the kind of innovative thinking it's going to take in order to make sure you've got that pipeline and you're starting your own companies. And so those are all things that we're focused on. And then I'll kind of wrap up with this. These are the foundations of recovery. This is what we're going to go to the General Assembly with in January to talk to them about. How do we incentivize corporate resiliency and particularly deal with cybersecurity in Georgia? I'm really worried. We've had so many people attacked, so many hospitals attacked. We got to strengthen our cybersecurity infrastructure in this state. So we're going to talk a lot about corporate resiliency. We're going to have a talk about innovation and infrastructure, and that comes in two ways. First of all, innovation. We need an entrepreneurial ecosystem in this state with maker spaces and incubators everywhere so that we're creating that next generation of entrepreneur. And we need the infrastructure, broadband and roads and bridges, airports, rail, and port deepening. We've been working, we had a press conference just yesterday with DOT and the ports and other friends and family in this industry. Georgia needs $2.5 billion a year for 30 years just to build out the infrastructure that we need today for our growth for tomorrow. That's going to be, an opportunity for economic recovery, but also an investment in the future. Small business survival, we're going to have more action out of Congress in order to keep these businesses afloat, particularly as we get into a third wave. And so we're going to have a discussion about that, probably more at the federal level, but also at the state level. We've also got to encourage communities, and I think this is almost more community than it is statewide, to have deeper discussions about inclusiveness and economic mobility. If we come out of this recession and we've left behind a third of the population living in poverty, that's a long-term drag on economic recovery. We need every Georgian to be working to find the employment that they want, to be able to grow and prosper and move from poverty to prosperity. Most of those conversations are going to be like the ones I led in Statesboro a few weeks ago, where the community's got to say, our chamber needs a diversity committee or a task force. What are we going to do? Let's reach out. And diversity, quite frankly, is more than black, white, and brown. It's young people. It's making sure women are in your leadership pipeline. It's thinking holistically about who's leading our community forward. We're going to have a deep dive discussion at the state level and probably at the local level about how we help people get new skills, how we make sure that our workforce is trained differently today than it was 8 months ago. And then lastly, we're going to focus at the chamber on what are those aspects of rural recovery, broadband being one of them, because quite frankly, how Atlanta recovers is going to be very different than how Richmond Hill or Savannah or Liberty County, or Waycross recovers. And I think you have to have very specific focused policies for rural Georgia. That's why we created the Center for Rural Prosperity in Tifton. That's why we're looking at how we're engaging on the coast of Georgia with your communities differently, more impactful, because we need to know what your issues are so that we can affect that change at the federal and state level. So I'll tell you, this legislative session coming up will be divided into two. You're going to have your typical 40-day session where we're going to deal with all these issues and lots of other ones. And then at the end of the day, we're going to come back for a legislative session on redistricting based upon your census count. So a lot going on as we get into 2021. What I want to ask you as I'll wrap up and then, Catherine, see if there are any questions here. Please go vote. I know you're sick and tired of politics. I'm not going to talk about all of it, and I know you're sick and tired of voting. But guys, the world is watching Georgia right now, and I don't care what your political stripes are, your affiliation. You just need to be committed to show up to vote. To learn more about that, you can go to GA Support the Vote or SecureTheVoteGeorgia.com. Encourage your employees to vote. Early voting should start, I believe it's December 15th. Absentee ballots should be mailed out December 1st if everything goes according to plan. But please take the time to do that. So with that, Catherine, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
All right. I haven't had any come in the chat box, but I did want to ask one question. So, how is working with our legislators changed since the pandemic began for y'all, and how do you kind of see that looking as y'all move forward into this 2021 session?
Well, I tell you, Catherine, when we came back in June to finish the legislative session, we brought forth several bills like the COVID Protection Act. And quite frankly, we saw a lot more bipartisanship, Republicans and Democrats wanting to work together to get some stuff done. Most of that's melted away as we've lived through this election cycle. But we've not stopped our job, which we do on your behalf, of meeting with Republicans, Democrats throughout the last 4 months, sharing with them ideas. I'll tell you, I was with the governor Thursday afternoon. He's put together a brand new team. They are laser focused on recovery. They're laser focused on working together. Democrats just elected new leadership in the House and the Senate. Republicans, I think, will vote this Friday. The House is elected some.
You're breaking up a little bit. Will you say that again for me?
So the Democrats just voted for new leadership in the House and Senate the last 3 days. Republicans will do that Friday, and we'll be there to engage in them, and hopefully we have the spirit of bipartisanship that we had back in June as we head into January.
Okay, so we did get one question in, and then at that we'll probably end the call. And if I get any other questions, I'll shoot them to y'all's team and send that out to our. But do you see the coastal area, especially Savannah, weathering the economic challenges of the pandemic better than, say, Metro Atlanta and some of the bigger cities?
I think it's actually Savannah and Atlanta, I think, are a little bit in the same boat here in that you're so heavy on tourism and hospitality. That's going to take a long time to recover. I mean, you're looking at 4 to 5 years for business travel, air travel to recover to the same levels. The great news about Savannah is you got the port there, you got logistics, you got other industry sectors there to balance it all out. But I am worried. I talked to the general manager of one of your major hotels in Savannah last week, and she said they were down 40%. Their weekend traffic was good, but they were getting no convention traffic, and they were most worried about St. Patrick's Day. There's some rumors in Savannah that they're not going to allow a St. Patrick's Day parade again, which would quite frankly be devastating. And I think if that happens, you're going to see some hotels down there really struggle to stay open. Delta is telling us it's going to be 3 years before they're back to normal, with international travel lagging even maybe further behind that. So all of those things are going to make any community that's heavily reliant on hospitality suffer. The good news is that the weekend travel is going to be there for you. We just got to get back in the habit of meeting in person. That's not going to happen until, I think, at the earliest, the summer, once you've got probably 40 to 50% of the general population with a vaccine. That's when I think things will turn around. But again, thank God for the diversity of your regional economy down there, because as long as people are buying stuff online, we're going to keep shipping stuff in and out of that port down there.
Well, and I just want to give a shout out as well for our partner on this series, our Development Authority of Bryan County. They have done such a great job of bringing in industries, creating jobs here in Bryan County and keeping people here locally. I think that's been a huge benefit for us. And I hate to hear about St. Patrick's Day, because I know our hotels and restaurants and local businesses definitely benefit from that, as well as they will stay in our community and travel into Savannah. But I don't see any other questions when we're a little over on time. But Chris, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come present. This is such great information. I personally have enjoyed all the calls that y'all have done throughout this time and have been so beneficial. For those that joined us, thank you so much. Just a reminder, we don't have a call on Thursday, and we don't have a call next week during Thanksgiving, but we will start back on Tuesday the 1st at 10 o'clock. We will be hearing from Representative Ron Stevens. And so we hope you will join us for that. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at the chamber at info@rhbcchamber.org. We hope you all have a great rest of the day, and thank you again for joining us.